There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew collapses in an instant, when the foundation you built your entire existence upon reveals itself to be nothing more than sand. For Percival Norton, that moment came on a humid Thursday afternoon in Phuket, delivered not by the woman he loved, but by the private investigator he had hired 3 weeks earlier. The manila envelope sat on the cafe table between them, innocent and damning all at once, containing photographs that would shatter not one relationship but two. The investigator, a weathered Australian expat who had seen this scenario play out dozens of times before, pushed the envelope forward with the weary resignation of a man tired of delivering bad news. He did not need to say anything. The weight of what lay inside hung in the air like the thick tropical humidity that clung to everything in southern Thailand. 67 years of life should have prepared Percival for disappointment. A successful career building and eventually selling a chain of hardware stores across the Midlands had taught him about risk, about trust, about reading people. 2 failed marriages back in the UK had shown him the signs of relationships deteriorating. Yet somehow, when it came to Kaewta, all that experience evaporated like morning mist over the Andaman Sea. He had met her 18 months earlier at a business networking event in Patong, of all places. Not a bar, not a dating app, a legitimate gathering of local entrepreneurs and expat investors. She had been there representing her small import-export business, dressed professionally in a navy blazer and pencil skirt, discussing logistics and customs regulations with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine knowledge. That is what had drawn him to her initially. Not her beauty, though at 30 years old she was undeniably attractive. It was her competence, her independence, her apparent lack of need for a foreign savior. Their first conversation had lasted nearly an hour, covering everything from the challenges of operating a business in Thailand to their shared appreciation for Italian food. She spoke English well, with only a slight accent that Percival found charming rather than problematic. When he asked for her line contact to continue their discussion about a potential business collaboration, she had hesitated just long enough to seem appropriately cautious, then agreed. That hesitation, in retrospect, had been perfectly calculated. Everything about Kaewta had been perfectly calculated from the very beginning, though Percival would not understand this until much later. The relationship developed slowly by modern standards, which had reassured Percival that this was different from the typical Farang Thai girl dynamic that so many expats fell into. They met for coffee twice before he worked up the courage to suggest dinner. She refused his first invitation, citing work commitments. When she finally agreed to a proper date 2 weeks later, Percival felt like he had earned something valuable. The dinner had been wonderful, conversation flowing easily between discussions of their respective businesses, their families, their views on life. Kaewta told him about growing up in Phuket, about her parents, who ran a small guest house, about her determination to build something of her own rather than rely on anyone else. She asked about his daughters back in England, about his grandchildren, showing what seemed like genuine interest in his life rather than just his bank account. Their physical relationship began a month into their dating, after what Percival considered an appropriately respectful courtship. Kaewta had invited him to her apartment, a modest but well-maintained place in a decent neighborhood for a home-cooked Thai meal. The intimacy that followed felt natural, unforced, like two adults who had found genuine connection. She had not asked him for money. She had not hinted at financial difficulties. She had simply been present, engaged, seemingly as invested in exploring this connection as he was. Looking back now, Percival could see how masterfully she had played it. By not asking for anything, she had made him want to give everything. Within 6 months, Percival had helped her expand her business with a £20,000 loan that she insisted on formalizing with a contract and payment schedule. She had made 3 payments on time before suggesting that it would be easier if they simply considered it an investment rather than a loan, given how serious their relationship had become. He had agreed, stupidly, proudly, feeling like a generous partner rather than a mark. By month 8, she had a key to his beachfront condo. By month 10, she was staying there more nights than not. By month 12, Percival was telling his friends back home that he had finally found the right woman. That age really was just a number. That his life in Thailand was everything he had hoped it would be when he had first considered retiring abroad. It was also around month 12 that Percival had met Malcolm, or rather, re-met him. Malcolm Pritchard had been a casual acquaintance from business circles back in the UK, someone Percival knew tangentially through various trade associations. Running into him at an expat gathering in Phuket had been a pleasant surprise. Malcolm had retired to Thailand about 5 years earlier, settled in Rawai with his own Thai partner, and seemed to have figured out the expat life successfully. The two Englishmen quickly became friends, meeting for golf every Tuesday morning and drinks every Friday evening. Malcolm met Kaewta several times at various social functions, always polite, always friendly, complimenting Percival on his good fortune in finding such an accomplished and beautiful partner. Kaewta, in turn, seemed to enjoy Malcolm's company, laughing at his jokes, asking about his business ventures, treating him with the same warm competence she showed everyone in Percival's social circle. The first crack in Percival's perfect life appeared so subtly that he almost missed it entirely. Kaewta began working later hours, or so, she said. Her import-export business was expanding, she explained, requiring more time at the warehouse, more meetings with suppliers, more travel to Bangkok for customs issues. Percival had no reason to doubt this. He had seen the business grow, had met some of her employees, had toured the modest warehouse space she rented. When she could not make their usual Wednesday dinner because of a late shipment arrival, he had simply ordered takeaway and watched football alone. When she canceled their weekend trip to Krabi because of an urgent supplier meeting, he had been disappointed but understanding. Business was business, after all. He knew that better than anyone. The phone became an issue around month 14. Kaewta had always been relatively casual about her mobile, leaving it on the counter while she showered, occasionally asking Percival to check messages for her while she was driving. Then suddenly, seemingly overnight, the phone became an extension of her body. It went everywhere with her, including the bathroom. The screen was always face down. When notifications came through, she would glance at them and quickly swipe them away before Percival could see anything. When he asked casually who kept messaging her, her response had been just slightly too sharp, just slightly too defensive. "Work," she said. "Always work. Why did he need to know every detail of her business communications? The tone had stung, so different from her usual warmth that Percival had actually apologized for being nosy. That night, lying awake while Kaewta slept beside him, Percival had felt the first cold tendril of real doubt snake through his chest. He pushed it away. This was exactly the kind of insecurity that had poisoned his previous marriages, this irrational jealousy, this need to control. Kaewta was an independent businesswoman with her own life, her own privacy. The fact that she did not share every message on her phone with him was healthy, not suspicious. He was being ridiculous. He was being exactly the kind of jealous old man he had promised himself he would never become. But the doubt, once acknowledged, refused to be completely dismissed. Percival found himself noticing things he had previously overlooked or rationalized. The way Kaewta smiled at her phone sometimes, a small secret smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at him anymore. The new perfume she had started wearing, heavier and more expensive than her usual subtle fragrance. The fact that she had begun going to the gym 4 times a week when she had previously shown little interest in fitness. New lingerie that he only discovered when doing laundry, delicate lace things that she had never worn for him, still in the drawer with tags attached. Each observation by itself meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that Percival's businessman brain could not help but recognize. He had spent 40 years reading market trends, identifying patterns in data, trusting his instincts about when something did not add up. Every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was wrong. But every time he approached the edge of actually confronting these suspicions, his fear pulled him back. Fear of being wrong and revealing himself as a jealous, insecure old man. Fear of being right and losing the woman who had made his retirement feel like the beginning of something rather than the end. Malcolm noticed the change in his friend before Percival acknowledged it himself. Over drinks one Friday evening, he had asked directly if everything was all right with Kaewta. Percival had lied, said everything was fine, just some business stress on her end. Malcolm had studied him for a long moment, the kind of appraising look that suggested he knew there was more to the story. But he had not pushed, had simply changed the subject to the upcoming Phuket Kings Cup regatta, and the moment had passed. That conversation stuck with Percival, though. The concern in Malcolm's eyes, the slight hesitation before accepting Percival's reassurance. Had Malcolm noticed something? Did he know something? The paranoia was beginning to take root properly now, sending out tendrils that wrapped around every interaction, every innocent moment, poisoning them with doubt. The breaking point came during what should have been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Percival had golf with Malcolm that morning, 9 holes at a course in Kaewta. Malcolm had not shown up. He had not called, had not messaged, simply failed to appear at their standing tea time. Percival had tried calling, gotten voicemail, left a message asking if everything was okay. He played 9 holes alone, badly, distracted by the unusual behavior from a friend who was normally religiously punctual. Afterward, still unable to reach Malcolm, Percival had driven to his friend's house in Rawai, concerned that something might be wrong. Malcolm's truck was in the driveway, which was odd. His Thai partner answered the door, seemed flustered to see Percival, said Malcolm was not feeling well and was sleeping. She would tell him Percival had stopped by. The whole interaction felt wrong. Her body language tense. Her eyes not quite meeting his, the door closing perhaps a bit too quickly. Percival sat in his car for a moment, that familiar cold tendril of doubt expanding into something larger, colder. He pulled out his phone and, for the first time in his life, did something he had never imagined himself doing. He opened a browser and searched for private investigators in Phuket. The decision felt simultaneously melodramatic and necessary. He was being paranoid, he told himself. He was being sensible. His business instincts countered. If he was wrong, he would apologize to Kaewta, explain his insecurity, work on trusting her more. If he was right, he needed to know. The not knowing was destroying him from the inside out, turning him into someone he did not recognize. Someone who checked his girlfriend's phone at 3 in the morning when she was in the bathroom. Someone who drove past her warehouse at odd hours to see if her car was really there. Someone who created fake social media accounts just to see if she was active on dating apps. The investigator Percival hired was named Rick, a former police officer from Sydney who had been conducting private investigations in Thailand for the past decade. His office was a small room above a 7-Eleven in Patong, cluttered with file folders and photographs. The desk dominated by multiple computer monitors showing various surveillance feeds. Rick had listened to Percival's concerns with the patient demeanor of someone who had heard the same story 100 times before. A younger Thai girlfriend, sudden changes in behavior, phone secrecy, unexplained absences. He had not judged, had not offered opinions, had simply quoted a rate and a timeline. 1 week of surveillance, comprehensive report, photographic evidence of activities during that period. £3,000. Percival had agreed without negotiation. The week that followed was psychological torture. Percival went about his normal routine, playing golf, meeting friends for dinner, spending evenings with Kaewta when she was available, all while knowing that somewhere in Phuket, Rick was following her, documenting her movements, recording her activities. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Part of him desperately hoped Rick would find nothing, would report back that Kaewta was exactly who she claimed to be, that Percival's suspicions were nothing more than the insecurities of an aging man dating a beautiful younger woman. Another part of him, the part that recognized patterns and trusted data over emotion, knew with growing certainty that his worst fears were about to be confirmed. Kaewta seemed completely oblivious to any surveillance, which either meant Rick was exceptionally good at his job, or that she was so confident in her deception that she had stopped being careful. She continued her normal pattern of behaviors, late nights at the warehouse, trips to Bangkok, gym sessions that lasted hours. She was affectionate when they were together, though that affection felt increasingly performative to Percival now that he was looking for signs of deception. The way she would check her phone mid-conversation, the slight delay before responding to his questions, as if mentally sorting truth from fiction. The fact that she had stopped initiating physical intimacy almost entirely, leaving it to him to make the first move, which he found himself doing less and less frequently. On Tuesday of that surveillance week, Kaewta told Percival she was going to Bangkok for 2 days to meet with suppliers. She packed a small bag, kissed him goodbye with what seemed like genuine warmth, promised to call when she arrived safely. She did call 4 hours later, from what she said was her hotel room near the port. They talked for 10 minutes about nothing in particular before she said she needed to prepare for her morning meeting and ended the call. Percival had lain in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan rotating slowly above him, wondering if she was really in Bangkok, wondering who she was with, wondering how much of the past 18 months had been real and how much had been an elaborately constructed performance. The call from Rick came on Friday afternoon. The report was ready. They should meet somewhere private to discuss the findings. The investigator's tone gave nothing away, but Percival knew. He knew with the same certainty he had known when his business was about to post record profits, or when a partnership was about to fall apart. The data was in, the pattern was clear, and his world was about to implode. Which brought him to Thursday afternoon, sitting across from Rick in a quiet cafe far from the tourist areas, staring at that manila envelope. The investigator had asked if Percival was sure he wanted to see the contents. Some clients, he explained, preferred a verbal summary, found the photographic evidence too difficult to process. Percival had insisted he needed to see. After all the suspicion, all the doubt, all the sleepless nights, he needed incontrovertible proof. He reached for the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade he was trying to maintain. The first photograph showed Kaewta leaving her apartment building, not in Bangkok, but in Phuket. On the Tuesday, she had supposedly traveled for business. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Percival felt his stomach clench. The timestamp showed 9:30 in the morning, about an hour after her supposed plane would have departed. Rick explained quietly that she had never gone to the airport. She had driven instead to a cafe in Patong, where she met someone. The second photograph punched all the air from Percival's lungs. Kaewta was sitting at an outdoor table, smiling, reaching across to touch the hand of the man sitting across from her. The man was Malcolm. Malcolm Pritchard, Percival's friend, his golf partner, the person he had confided in about his relationship concerns. The photograph showed them in a moment of obvious intimacy, their body language speaking volumes about the nature of their relationship. This was not a friendly coffee between acquaintances. This was something else entirely. The subsequent photographs documented a story Percival's mind struggled to accept even as his eyes processed the evidence. Malcolm and Kaewta leaving the cafe together, getting into Malcolm's truck. Malcolm's truck parked outside a beachfront hotel in Kamala. The two of them checking in at the front desk, Malcolm's hand on the small of Kaewta's back. A timestamp showing them entering a room. A timestamp several hours later showing them leaving, Kaewta's hair slightly disheveled. Both of them relaxed and smiling. More photographs from other days that week. Different locations, but the same story. A restaurant in Rawai where they fed each other food across the table. A movie theater where Malcolm had his arm around her shoulders. A beach at sunset where they walked hand in hand like any other couple enjoying paradise. Rick produced another set of photographs, these ones more damning. Screenshots of line conversations between Malcolm and Kaewta, obtained through methods Percival did not ask about and did not want to know. The messages went back months, perhaps as far back as Malcolm and Percival had first reconnected. Flirtatious messages at first, testing boundaries. gradually escalating to explicit sexual content that made Percival feel physically ill to read. Plans for meetups, discussions of logistics, how to avoid being seen by mutual friends. References to Percival that were mocking in tone, calling him naive, gullible, too trusting. Kaewta had written, in one message that seared itself into Percival's brain, he never suspects anything. Too blind with love or whatever he thinks this is. The final folder in the envelope contained financial records. Rick had done thorough work. Bank statements showing regular deposits into Kaewta's account from both Percival and Malcolm. Credit card statements showing Malcolm paying for the hotels, the restaurants, the trips. Phone records showing the frequency of communication between Malcolm and Kaewta. Hundreds of calls and messages, far more than either of them communicated with Percival. A timeline that showed the affair had begun approximately 3 months after Percival, and Malcolm had reconnected, which meant it had been going on for at least 10 months. 10 months of deception, of lies, of playing two men against each other, while collecting money and support from both. Percival sat in silence for a long time after reviewing all the evidence. Rick watched him with professional sympathy, sipping his coffee, allowing his client time to process the information. Finally, Percival spoke, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Too calm, too measured. He asked about Malcolm's Thai partner, the woman who had answered the door. Rick shook his head. She existed, she lived there, but she was more of a housekeeper and occasional companion. Malcolm was no more faithful to her than Kaewta was to Percival. The investigator had been thorough, anticipating the questions his client would have. The numbness that settled over Percival as he left that cafe was almost welcome after weeks of anxiety and suspicion. The dread had been worse than the confirmation in some ways. At least now he knew. At least now the not knowing had ended. He drove home in a daze, the envelope full of evidence on the passenger seat beside him, his mind spinning through the implications, the memories recontextualizing themselves with this new information. Every time Malcolm had asked about Kaewta, every time Kaewta had mentioned running into Malcolm somewhere, every time the three of them had socialized together, Malcolm and Kaewta maintaining perfect composure, treating each other with casual friendliness, while hiding a passionate affair that apparently included mocking the man they were both deceiving. Kaewta was supposed to return from her fake Bangkok trip that evening. Percival went home and waited. He did not call her. He did not message. He simply sat in his living room with the envelope of photographs on the coffee table, watching the sun set over the Andaman Sea, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful given the ugliness of what he had discovered. He wondered distantly how he would feel when she walked through the door. Rage? Grief? The numbness that currently insulated him from the full emotional impact? He had no idea. He had never been in this situation before, betrayed not just by a romantic partner, but by a friend. The two people he trusted most in his life conspiring together against him. She arrived just after 7, rolling her small suitcase through the door, calling out a cheerful greeting, asking if he had missed her. Percival watched her from the sofa. This woman he thought he knew. This woman he had loved, trying to reconcile the warm, smiling person entering his home with the woman in the photographs, her hand in Malcolm's, her head thrown back in laughter at some joke. Percival was not privy to. She stopped when she saw his face, her own smile faltering. She asked what was wrong. He did not answer, simply picked up the envelope and held it out to her. The change in Kaewta's expression as she pulled out the first few photographs was remarkable. Shock gave way to calculation in a heartbeat, her mind clearly racing through possible responses, possible explanations, possible escape routes. She looked at Percival, opened her mouth, closed it again, looked back at the photographs. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she spoke, and her first words were, "You hired someone to follow me." The indignation in her voice was almost convincing. The offense she took at this violation of her privacy, as if that was the real betrayal in this situation. Percival laughed, a harsh sound that surprised them both. He asked if she really thought she had the moral high ground here. Did she really think turning this into an argument about his trust issues was going to work? She put the photographs down on the counter, crossed her arms, and asked what he wanted her to say. Just like that, the mask dropped. No tears, no denials, no pleading. Just cold calculation. Assessing how much she could salvage from this situation, he told her. He wanted the truth. All of it. How long, how it started, whether she had ever felt anything genuine for him at all. She sighed, the sound of someone inconvenienced rather than someone caught in a devastating betrayal. She sat down on the opposite end of the sofa, maintaining physical distance, and began to talk. She and Malcolm had met at one of the first social events, where Percival had introduced them. Malcolm had approached her later, gotten her line, started messaging. She had resisted at first, she claimed, but he was persistent, charming. He understood her in ways Percival did not. He was closer to her age mentally, even though he was in his 60s like Percival. They had started meeting for coffee, then lunch, then eventually the relationship became physical. It had been going on for 10 months, just as the timeline suggested. Percival listened to this recitation of facts, delivered in a tone one might use to describe a business transaction, and felt something crack inside his chest. He asked if anything about their relationship had been real. Had she ever loved him, or had it all been an act from the beginning? Kaewta looked at him for a long moment, something that might have been sympathy crossing her face. Though it vanished so quickly, he could not be sure. She said she liked him well enough. He was kind, generous, stable. But love, she did not think she had ever loved him. No. She was not sure she was capable of that kind of feeling for any Farang. They were too different, their worlds too far apart. The honesty almost worse than continued lies would have been. Percival asked about the money. She shrugged. She needed money, he had money, Malcolm had money. This was Thailand. Farang had money, and Thai women needed money. It was practically a national industry. He should not act so shocked. Percival felt rage finally breaking through the numbness, hot and clarifying. He told her to get out. Pack her things and get out of his home. She stood, seemingly unbothered, and asked where she was supposed to go. Without missing a beat, he suggested Malcolm's place. Surely her boyfriend would take her in. She moved toward the bedroom to collect her belongings, then paused and turned back. Her next words came out with an edge of defensive hostility that revealed the first crack in her calm facade. She told him this was partially his fault. He was too jealous, too suspicious, always questioning her, never fully trusting her. that had pushed her towards someone who did not interrogate her every move. If he had just been more secure, more confident, maybe she would not have needed to seek attention elsewhere. The gaslighting was brazen, shameless, and Percival might have fallen for it a month ago, might have accepted blame for his own betrayal. But with the photographs still spread across his coffee table, the evidence of 10 months of deception, the attempt to make him feel responsible for her infidelity was so transparent, it was almost laughable. He told her to spare him the justifications. She had cheated because she wanted to, because she could, because she had found two foreign men willing to support her financially while she played them both. Own it or do not, but do not stand in his home and try to make it his fault. Something flickered across her face then. Maybe anger. Maybe respect for finally seeing through her manipulation. She went to the bedroom without another word. He could hear her moving around, packing, the sounds of her dismantling the life she had built in his space. Or rather, the life he had thought they were building together. The life that had never really existed outside his own wishful thinking. 20 minutes later, she emerged with 2 suitcases and her overnight bag. She stopped at the door, looked at him one last time, and told him he would regret this. He had just thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him. She could have made him happy if he had not been so paranoid and controlling. Other men would appreciate what he had taken for granted. The words were designed to wound, to plant doubt, to make him question his decision, even as he was making it. They did not work. Percival felt nothing but a cold certainty that he was watching a performance. One last attempt to maintain control of the narrative, to leave him feeling guilty or uncertain. He told her goodbye. She left, the door closing behind her with decisive finality. The silence that followed was profound. Percival sat alone in his condo, surrounded by the remnants of a relationship that had never been what he thought it was, and felt the full weight of the betrayal settle over him. Not just Kaewta, though her deception was devastating enough, but Malcolm, a friend, someone he had trusted with his doubts and fears, who had offered advice and sympathy, who had been sleeping with his girlfriend the entire time. The dual betrayal was almost too much to process. He had lost 2 important relationships in one afternoon, discovered that 2 people he cared about had been conspiring against him for months, laughing at him, taking his money, playing him for a fool. The following days brought more revelations as Percival began piecing together the full scope of the deception. He contacted Rick again, asked him to dig deeper into the timeline. The investigator discovered that Malcolm had approached Kaewta first, not the other way around. He had seen her with Percival at that initial social event, and had apparently decided he wanted her for himself. The whole thing had been calculated, predatory even, a deliberate theft of his friend's girlfriend with her full cooperation. Messages between them revealed that they had discussed the best way to keep Percival from finding out, how to manage his suspicions when they arose, how to reassure him while maintaining their affair. Malcolm had even given Kaewta advice on how to handle Percival's jealousy, coaching her through their arguments, telling her what to say to make him back down and stop asking questions. The Friday evening drinks, Percival realized with sick clarity, had been intelligence-gathering sessions. Malcolm would ask about the relationship. Percival would confide his concerns, and Malcolm would immediately pass that information to Kaewta so she could adjust her behavior accordingly. Every conversation had been a betrayal. Every sympathetic nod, every piece of friendly advice, all of it in service of continuing to deceive him while sleeping with his girlfriend. Percival tried calling Malcolm once, 2 days after Kaewta had left. The call went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. What would he even say? The friendship, such as it was over. They existed in the same expat social circles, would inevitably run into each other at events, but Percival had no interest in confrontation or closure or whatever Malcolm might want to offer. The evidence spoke for itself. There was nothing Malcolm could say that would explain away 10 months of deliberate, calculated betrayal. Other expats in their social circle began to notice the shift. Percival and Malcolm no longer met for golf. Kaewta was no longer at Percival's side during social events. A few brave souls asked what had happened. Percival gave minimal details, said the relationship had run its course, declined to elaborate. He felt no need to publicly shame Kaewta or Malcolm, no desire to turn their betrayal into gossip for the expat community. The people who needed to know what kind of person Malcolm was would find out eventually. These things always came to light. What surprised Percival most in the aftermath was not the grief, though that came in waves at unexpected moments. It was the vindication, the bitter, petty satisfaction of having been right all along. Every time someone had told him he was being paranoid, every time he had second-guessed his own instincts, every time Kaewta had made him feel crazy for suspecting what turned out to be absolutely true, he had absorbed the doubt and turned it inward. Now, with the evidence spread before him, with the truth undeniable, he felt a grim sense of validation. He had not been crazy. He had not been paranoid. He had been correct. His gut had told him something was wrong, and his gut had been absolutely right. This vindication did not make him feel better. Exactly. It did not ease the pain or erase the humiliation. But it did something perhaps more important. It restored his faith in his own judgment, his own perception of reality. For months, he had been gaslit into doubting what his senses were telling him. He had been made to feel like the problem, like his jealousy and insecurity were creating issues that did not exist. Now he knew that his instincts had been sound, his pattern recognition accurate, his suspicions justified. In a strange way, that knowledge was more valuable than the relationship itself had been. Percival found himself replaying moments from the past 18 months, seeing them now through the lens of truth, rather than the distortion of Kaewta's lies. That time she had been unusually affectionate after coming home late, probably overcompensating for guilt. The weekend she had claimed to visit family in Chiang Mai, likely spent with Malcolm somewhere else entirely. The new necklace, she had said, was a gift from a grateful business client, probably from Malcolm. Every memory was tainted now, recontextualized, transformed from something cherished into evidence of deception. The business loan that was never really a loan, the investment he had made in her import-export company, turned out to be another layer of the con. Rick's financial investigation revealed that the business was barely functional, more of a shell company than an actual operation. The warehouse Percival had visited was rented by the month and mostly empty. The employees he had met were friends of Kaewta's, playing roles for the day he came to visit. The whole elaborate story about expanding her business, needing capital for growth, it had all been fiction designed to extract money. Malcolm, it turned out, had contributed a similar amount. Between them, they had funded Kaewta's lifestyle for the better part of a year. 3 weeks after their breakup, Kaewta tried to contact Percival. A message online, brief and transactional. She needed money. The business was struggling without his support. Could he help? Just this once, for old time's sake. The audacity of the request was almost impressive. He blocked her number without responding. 2 days later, Malcolm called. Percival answered this time, curious despite himself. Malcolm wanted to meet, to talk, to explain. There was more to the story, he claimed. Things Percival did not understand. Could they meet for coffee, clear the air? Percival laughed and told him there was nothing to clear. He knew everything he needed to know. He hung up while Malcolm was still trying to justify his actions. The expat rumor mill eventually filled in the rest of the story. Kaewta had indeed moved in with Malcolm, but the relationship fell apart within a month. Apparently, she had been seeing yet another man, a younger Australian who had just moved to Phuket. Malcolm discovered this in much the same way Percival had, through growing suspicion and eventual investigation. The irony was not lost on Percival. Malcolm had stolen another man's girlfriend, only to have her stolen from him in turn. The pattern would likely continue with the Australian, and the man after him, and the man after that. Kaewta was what she was, and no amount of money or devotion was going to change that fundamental reality. Malcolm left Phuket about 2 months after the affair came to light. Someone told Percival he had moved to Chiang Mai, trying to start fresh somewhere without the constant reminder of his actions. Percival felt nothing at this news. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just a distant sense of closure. The man who had betrayed him was gone, and good riddance. Let him build a new life somewhere else, hopefully with enough self-awareness to avoid repeating the same patterns. As for Percival, he found himself reassessing everything about his life in Thailand. The relationship with Kaewta had been the anchor of his retirement plan, the thing that made living in Phuket feel like home rather than just an extended vacation. Without her, the island felt different, smaller, less appealing. He began to notice things he had previously overlooked. The transactional nature of so many expat Thai relationships, the undercurrent of exploitation that ran through the bar scenes, the assumption among some Thai women that foreign men were walking ATMs to be managed and manipulated. This was not to say all Thai women were like Kaewta, or that all relationships between Thai women and foreign men were doomed. Percival knew couples who seemed genuinely happy, genuinely in love, with relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial transaction. But he also recognized that he lacked the judgment to distinguish between authentic connection and skilled performance. Kaewta had fooled him completely. What made him think he could spot a genuine relationship when he had failed so spectacularly to recognize a false one? The jealousy that had plagued him during the relationship, that had driven him to hire a private investigator, that had made him feel alternately vindicated and ashamed, slowly began to recede. He recognized now that it had not been jealousy in the traditional sense. It had been his subconscious mind trying to alert him to danger, trying to get his attention, trying to make him see what his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. The physical symptoms he had experienced, the anxiety, the obsessive checking, the inability to relax, those had been warning signs. His body had known before his mind accepted it that something was fundamentally wrong. There was a lesson in that, Percival reflected. Trust your gut. When every instinct is screaming that something is wrong, do not let anyone convince you that you are being irrational or paranoid. Investigate, verify, and if you discover betrayal, leave. Do not waste time on someone who lies to your face while planning their next deception. Life is too short to spend it with people who view you as a resource to be exploited, rather than a person to be respected. 6 months after the breakup, Percival was living a quieter life. Fewer social events, more time on his own, healing from the double betrayal. He had learned to enjoy solitude again, something he had forgotten during the intensity of the relationship. He traveled more, explored other parts of Thailand, considered whether he wanted to stay in Phuket or move elsewhere. The condo that had once felt like home now felt like a museum to his gullibility, every corner holding memories of the life he thought he had built. He sold it eventually, took a loss on the sale, but did not care. The money was not important. What mattered was cutting ties with that chapter of his life, starting fresh somewhere new. He moved to Chiang Mai briefly, found it pleasant but too full of other Malcolm refugees and aging expats chasing similar dreams. Eventually, he settled in Hua Hin, a quieter beach town with less of the bar scene that had indirectly led him to Kaewta. It suited him better, this slower pace, these lower stakes. Percival dated again, cautiously, without the intensity or investment of his relationship with Kaewta. He learned to enjoy companionship without confusing it with love, to appreciate connection without demanding commitment. He became, if not exactly happy, at least content. The vindication he had felt upon discovering the affair had faded, replaced by something more valuable: self-knowledge, self-trust. The understanding that his instincts were sound, his judgment was not as flawed as he had feared, and his capacity for pattern recognition could be trusted, even when others tried to convince him he was wrong. Looking back now, 18 months felt like both a lifetime and an instant. So much had happened in that compressed period, so many emotions experienced, so many lessons learned the hard way. If he could go back and warn his past self about Kaewta, about Malcolm, would he? Percival was not sure. Part of him wanted to spare his younger self the pain. Another part recognized that the experience had taught him things about himself, about relationships, about trust and deception, that he could not have learned any other way. The private investigator's fee had been £3,000. The money he had invested in Kaewta's fake business, $20,000. The emotional cost of the betrayal, incalculable. But the value of learning to trust his own instincts again, of having his pattern recognition vindicated, of knowing with absolute certainty that his gut feelings were not paranoia but accurate danger. Assessment? That was worth something too. Not enough to make the experience worthwhile, perhaps, but enough to extract meaning from the pain. For anyone reading this story, anyone in a similar situation where something feels wrong, but you cannot quite put your finger on it, where your partner's behavior has changed, but they insist you are being paranoid, where friends are trying to warn you, but you are defending your relationship. Let me offer this advice. Listen to your instincts. If it feels wrong, investigate. If you find evidence of betrayal, believe it. Do not let anyone gaslight you into doubting your own perception of reality. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are picking up on signals that your conscious mind has not yet fully processed. The phone password that suddenly appears. The late nights that become more frequent. The emotional distance that widens into a chasm. The defensiveness when you ask simple questions. These are not signs of your jealousy problem. These are signs of their deception problem. The only question is whether you are brave enough to find out the truth and strong enough to walk away when you do. Percival Norton learned this lesson the hard way. At 67 years old, in a beachfront condo in Phuket, with photographs spread across his coffee table and his friend's betrayal echoing in his ears. The vindication of being right did not erase the pain of being wrong about two people he trusted. But it did restore something important: his faith in his own judgment, his understanding that sometimes jealousy is not a character flaw but a warning system, his knowledge that investigating suspicion is not paranoia but self-preservation. He was right to suspect. He was right to investigate. He was right to demand the truth. And he was right to leave when that truth revealed itself. That knowledge sustained him through the dark months that followed, and sustains him still. Being proven right is cold comfort when you have lost people you cared about. But it is better than the alternative of remaining deceived, losing more time, more money, more of yourself to people who never valued you at all. That, in the end, is the story of how Percival Norton discovered his girlfriend was cheating on him with his friend, and how the vindication of being right could not quite compensate for the loss of being wrong. The lesson, hard won and painful, is this: trust your instincts, investigate your doubts, and never let anyone convince you that your accurate perception of betrayal is actually your paranoid imagination. Sometimes jealousy is not a flaw. Sometimes it is your subconscious trying to save you from people who do not deserve your trust. Listen to it.